Welcome to the podcast where this week we take something old, the first Dalek story, and turn it into something new, the Daleks in colour, by adding something borrowed. A nice colour palette from the 1960s, and that's Something Who. So hello, I'm Richard, and we're back with Something Who podcast episode 85, and this time we're lucky enough to have several of the team responsible for the new colour version of the Daleks, shown on the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who on BBC4 and the iPlayer. So hello to Benjamin Cook, Rich Tipple, and Timothy K. Brown. Hi, maybe you'd like to introduce yourselves.
My name's Ben. I'm the editor of the Daleks in colour. I'm the person responsible for hacking out all of your favourite bits.
Fantastic.
My name's Richard. I was the lead colourisation artist on the Daleks, and I'm responsible for all the colours that you didn't like.
And I'm Timothy K. Brown, known online as That's Chroma. And yeah, I coloured it under Richard's direction, basically. Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I mean, I have been watching Doctor Who for over 50 years, but I think the moment that I trace back to becoming a fan was when I bought the Target book, Doctor Who and the Daleks, by David Whittaker in 1975. That story really grabbed me, and it's still a favourite of mine. Unfortunately, back in the 70s and 80s, you couldn't just go and watch a Doctor Who story when you wanted to. I didn't actually see any of it until the early 80s. They showed episode 2 at a cinema in Bradford when I went to along to that. And I didn't see the rest of the story until right at the end of the 80s when it came out on VHS.
So you were left on a cliffhanger for how many years?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it must have been about 7 years or something like that. Yeah, as they were still in the cell. Well, in fact, Susan was in the TARDIS and trying to decide whether she dared go back. Yeah,
what
absolutely. So yeah, look, it's been with me a long time. I was fascinated to see what it would look like in colour, and also intrigued by what it would be like to have a 75-minute version. I have to say, I enjoyed it very much. But it did have a different feeling from the original, and you know, maybe we can talk about that. And on Something Who, we typically talk about storytelling. I mean, that's the thing that interests us. And I guess what might be interesting to explore is how some of the choices that you made along the way influenced, you know, how the story is told. And I guess the first thing to kick off with was 75 minutes an explicit part of your brief? I mean, was it getting it down to a specific amount of time, or was it just trying to get it down to an amount that would be watchable?
It sort of was part of the brief, yeah. I mean, partly with the sort of the carrot being dangled on the stick of, well, if we can get it down to about 75 minutes, we can get it on the telly.
Right.
For a project that it's for Doctor Who fans, it's for everyone, but also we're really hoping we're going to get some of those, you know, we were going to get some of those 12-year-olds and 16-year-olds watching who might not have experienced any classic Doctor Who might not have experienced 60s Doctor Who before. It was quite important to us to try and get it down to, a nice tight 75 minutes. And you mentioned that book, which I should correct you. I should give it its title, Doctor Who in an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks, because that is the greatest title for any Doctor Who book ever. And that book was part of the inspiration. You know, what's remarkable about that original Dalek serial is that it aired at the end of 63 into 64. And that book came out when it was sort of summer of 64. So within just a few months of the TV version, there was already an alternative rewriting of it. Someone had already remixed it, albeit David Whittaker, who was allowed because he was the show's story editor. And then within another year, there was that first Cushing movie, which again reworked the story hugely again. And within another year, there was the American comic book, which again took liberties with all sorts of stuff. So that first Dalek story had been, reworked and remixed so many times before William Hartnell had even regenerated into Patrick Troughton. So we were sort of taking our cues from that. So my own fond memories of that David Whittaker book and the Cushing movie and all of it, really.
Rich, how did the thought of colorizing 75 minutes, was that terrifying, or did that feel like something that was manageable?
It was utterly terrifying, I think, definitely on the terrifying side of things. I'd gone from a place where, I could spend 6-7 months on a 2-3 minute YouTube clip and really make sure it was perfect and it was exactly how I wanted it to be, to being briefed on this is the execution, this is what we need to deliver. I'm having a brilliant team of people with me. I'm very lucky, I think. The relationship I had with Kieran and Scott, particularly because we'd worked on Day of Armageddon.
Yeah.
So that we had a workflow that the three of us already knew. So that was a bit of a lifesaver. And I'd say even though that project took like an astonishing amount of time, about 25% of it came together in the last year. So we had an idea of actually how this is going to work for us. But there's, even with that, we knew we would need a fourth person. We'd need the incredibly talented Timothy K. Brown, who thankfully agreed to join our merry band of colorisers. But even with that, even with the four of us working on it, it was a daunting proposition doing 75 minutes, particularly at the standard we wanted to achieve. I mean, we could have done a rubbish 75 minutes quite easily, but we wanted to set the bar quite high because we're fans of this material.
We weren't doing a rubbish. We weren't going to.
There was no way we would be allowed. We would have got away with a rubbish 75 minutes. We care deeply about this stuff. I'm a massive Hulk fan, and I'm a big fan of colorizing the 60s just generally. It's what I've been doing as a hobby for 10 years. So, yeah, I felt a great weight of responsibility to do a really, really good job. And so that big 75-minute timeline was as exciting a target as it was a daunting target.
And this is the problem as well with if we'd gone, we could have said, well, let's add an extra couple of minutes, let's just add an extra 5 minutes, let's add an extra 10 minutes. And then you realize that in the real world, that means an extra, month's worth of work for these guys. Yeah. So there had to be a cutoff point, or we would have killed them, and it's not worth it.
Yeah. And I think also, I mean, I my guess is, if it was 85 minutes long, there'd be somebody saying, oh, you missed this bit out. If it was 95 minutes long, somebody would say, oh, you missed my favourite bit out. You could have just taken 10 minutes out, and for somebody it would have been their favourite bit. So I guess, you can't possibly win.
The original is, some people might know and some people might not, but the original, when you run it back to back, is 172 minutes. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, even if we'd cut it to 90 or 85 or 80, that's still a heck of a cut. So you've got to sort of, if you're going to do it, you may as well really go for it. Tight 75 minutes. In fact, it's 74 because there's a montage at the end. Yeah. Tight 74 minutes, and and be bold with it and own it and make it your own. Yeah. Yeah.
Even the greatest fans of it would probably say that the second half of the story is kind of a bit saggy in places. So we've kind of come to. And actually the Cushing telling, which is 80 odd minutes. I mean, that doesn't do a bad job of fitting in pretty much most of the important plot points.
Yeah, and they had an advantage. I mean, they had much more money to start, but they had an advantage that a luxury that we didn't have, which is that they were able to edit it at the scripting stage.
Yeah,
we are working with the material that was shot and edited or sort of vision mix back then. So there's there are some bits that have to remain because characters are going from A to B and they can't just, suddenly appear in a new location. There's, if we were starting from scratch at the scripting stage, you can make all sorts of different decisions, but that wasn't open to us. And it was always going to be, I think, a project that it's tough as an editor, particularly. It's tough because it's very unusual to be editing something where people have seen the rushes, they've seen the original footage. A lot of fans watching will have seen the full 172-minute version, so they will be watching, going, "Oh, that bit's missing, and that shot's missing," and that Usually, when you watch Doctor Who, you don't know what was cut at the scripting stage, and you don't know even what was cut at the editing stage. People do with this, so it's quite daunting. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
you've also got the issue there's with a 25-minute episode. You want to save the big Dalek reveal in the first episode till the end of the episode. It's a big cliffhanger. It makes total sense to put it there. With what Ben's brief was, there's no way you could just have 25 minutes of episode 1 and then introduce the Daleks. You need to get to the Daleks pretty quickly. You were constantly, I imagine, Ben, you were constantly looking at your watch thinking, have I got enough time left to tell this story?
Yeah, and also, I mean, as you mentioned, Richard, they sort of you say it sags in the middle episodes, and I know what you mean. That there is a point in the story, famously, where they sort of realise they have 3 or 4 more episodes left, and so they do the whole plot again. Let's go back into the city. So certainly for the final act of our version, the final sort of half hour, things speed up quite a bit. because we have seen them do this already.
Yeah. So Timothy, what's your connection then with this particular story? I mean, what's your history with it?
Well, I would have seen it back in 2003 for the first time when ABC in Australia did their full repeat of not quite everything that existed. They skipped over a few. So I watched from An Unearthly Child from the very beginning, and I was about 10 years old, basically the perfect age. Right. And honestly, I was hooked from the very first episode, but the Daleks in particular, I was Dalek mad at that age. I mean, I consumed every bit of Dalek media I could find, and the movies were brilliant, and I'd watch this story, the Daleks, on VHS, looking absolutely awful as it did. And it's just always been there, as long as I've been a fan, really. Yeah, and I remember when I was starting to do colorizations, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it must have been about 2017, 18. I tried to do a clip from episode 2 of the Daleks. Was it episode 2? Yes. It's in the cell, the bit where Ian is talking to Susan about going out. Straight there, straight back. That bit.
Yeah.
And it was rubbish. It was the very first thing I'd ever attempted to do. And then here we are, however many years later, doing that exact same scene and getting paid to do it. It's quite remarkable, really. I'm going to put that up on... It'll go up on Twitter as a comparison at some point I'd like to do to show, here's where it started, here's where it ended up.
I would never show mine as a comparison, but weirdly enough, the very first thing I ever attempted, I think, was that lovely, this senseless evil killing line from William Hartnell. And that was obviously, that was from the Daleks as well. So I had a very similar moment to you where, fast forward 10 years and here I am actually doing it properly.
I've started really a number of colorizations from the Daleks, and they just never finished any of them. Until this one, obviously.
We had to finish this one.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think it's quite interesting, actually, that what you've brought up there, the straight there, straight back thing. I mean, people have been talking about the flashbacks that you put in there as if this was kind of like a strange and new thing, but actually that line is a flashback. They say straight there, straight back, and then towards the end of the episode, Susan's hearing it in her head in the TARDIS. So actually, it was a thing that was already in there.
An Unearthly Child does it. If you start watching from the beginning, if you're able to do that these days, and watch a child, then there's quite liberal use of flashbacks. You would assume that was house style. You're quite right. Then in the Daleks, they do it again with that voiceover from Ian, and then they sort of don't for however many decades. That's sort of it. So I didn't feel, I felt it was at least adhering to house style by putting in a few flashbacks. Those flashbacks are there to cover editing points. I mean, that's with a couple of exceptions. That is why they're there. It's the choice between having, a scene play out for 2 minutes or putting in a flashback, and you can cut it to 1 minute or 1.5 minutes. And actually, if you're saving even 30 seconds when you're trying to get to a tight, 75 minutes, it's worth doing. And you're from an editing point of view, you are pulling every trick in the book, because it's 60s Doctor Who as well as any of us. It's fascinating to sort of watch Doctor Who from like 1963 and then jump forward 5-6 years to sort of 68, 69, and then another 5 or 6 years to the mid 70s, and you can see the BBC Doctor Who learning how to make modern television drama, because back in 63 it is still, as it's been said 1,000 times before, but it is still sort of theatre on screen. And so you get these long, continuous sort of shots, nothing to cut away to. So if there's a bit at the beginning of the scene you really want to keep in there, and there's a bit at the end of the scene which you really want to keep in there, but you've got a minute or two in the middle which you want to cut out, but you've got nothing to cut away to, you are having to try and, play every trick in the book.
Okay. The quality of the original video, so we're talking about 405 lines. In some cases it's also suppressed field, so it's actually half of that number of lines, and actually some of the lines aren't visible anyway. So I just wonder, how did that impact on being able to colorize it effectively, or did it make any difference? I mean, I guess, if you're dealing with the 625 lines from later on, it's a higher definition picture. Did it make a difference to you?
Which one of us is going to answer this?
I'd love to. I think any first year restoration is your bag, Tim. Definitely.
All right, I'll talk about this. So I would say that if we're looking at it purely from a technical standpoint, the Daleks is a really terrible choice because we got
Right.
two suppressed field episodes, which these are 4 or 5 line picture. Only 377 of those are actual image.
Yeah.
And so the suppressed field ones, they're 188 lines maximum. That's nothing, basically.
Yeah.
And it's very steppy and coarse and horrible. And also the studio cameras they were using were kind of out of date even then. I mean, they were installed in the mid-50s. And they have very smeary, laggy, noisy pictures. So you combine all this together, it's quite difficult. Whenever anything moves, it just goes fuzzy. And it's really difficult to keep the colours aligned with the fuzziness.
Right.
You know, Rich, if you found it similarly challenging, more challenging than pretty much anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a colorization is only as good as the image you're applying it to in so many respects. That you need to have a nice dynamic range. You need to have a lovely mix of sort of greys in there as well. And the starker the image and the less quality in the image, then that's going to reflect in the colorization. So yeah, it was definitely a challenge, particularly on the suppressed field ones. But this whole project was a challenge, so it was just something else to get to grips with, really. And honestly, we were lucky enough to have episode 7 taken out the BFI and rescanned, which was wonderful.
Right.
We haven't. That just doesn't magically give us any more sort of lines of information, but it gives us.
No, it's still a suppressed field negative.
It's still suppressed field negative, but it's a better photo of a really bad photo. Yeah. I guess that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So
it's not
that point of view,
like the old print.
Exactly, it helps from that point of view. And of course,
better.
Tim is a wizard when it comes to restoration and was able to do all sorts of things to episode 5 and 7. So they will still not look like 65 line or anything like that. No. But if you were to have a direct contrast, particularly, I think one of the most noticeable bits, because you really see it on straight lines. And if you were to look at that very final shot with Hartnell sort of dancing around the TARDIS control room, which is just lovely. In the original that you might have on a DVD on your shelf at home, you'll see a load of jaggedness to the lines on that.
Yeah.
And if you were to do a direct compare to what we've got in this, you'll notice how much work has gone into restoring that image. And there's a lot of examples in episode 7 where you can see that when the 2 Daleks, one of my shots in the control room were 2 Daleks looking into a monitor, sort of a really nice sort of mid 2 shot. The original was really jagged, it caused all sorts of pattern. I think it's like a moire pattern thing on the control panels, and I mean, obviously you've got the straight arms of the Dalek plunger arms are sort of all jaggedy and stepped.
Diagonals are high contrast, but you really know.
They're really painful to do, and when you colorize it, you can't draw a straight line. You have to kind of color in the jaggedy bits, because
not a straight line.
Yeah, you've got to apply the color to the image, not you can't force it the other way. But what was really good is Tim was able to go in and use some amazing technology to fill in a lot of the information between the lines to make that stepness less severe. So as we say, you're never going to get, well, maybe we will, hopefully, who knows what technology can do. It's just made the colour, right? So, hey.
Yeah.
But in years to come, hopefully that's something that can be worked upon. But as things are, we can't add any more sort of information in, but we can sort of smooth the information that's there. And that's what we're able to do to 5 and 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that was kind of my...
Go on.
Was to smooth out the edges. They can't really increase the resolution, but you can make the artifacts less apparent, especially because we're cutting it up with the other episodes. I felt it was really important to try and make it a bit more consistent, so there weren't massive jumps in quality as it was going along.
Sure. A tribute to that, I think, is that it wasn't immediately obvious to me, except in retrospect, that I knew that episode 7 was of lower quality, but actually watching it didn't seem to make that big a difference. I think you've made a great job of making that much less visible. Yeah, I guess we should talk about the colours as well, because I mean they are they're beautiful. They are kind of really, they make the whole thing look more alien, I think, in a lot of places. And yeah, I suppose they're beyond our imagining as well. So it's much more like, I suppose, the TV21 Dalek strips, I suppose, than perhaps the colour photos from the sets. Do you want to talk a bit about how you made those choices and so on?
I was a kid in a sweet shop, really. Imagine being told that, you can come up with colour palettes for how the first appearance of the Daleks gets to look. That's quite scary, because it's something that people care about deeply, as do I, but also, wow, I mean, I get to choose what the control panels look like and all of that sort of stuff. So I had some very early meetings with Phil. I brought my laptop along and I showed him a lot of stuff, I think, from the original Star Trek, from Batman, etc.
Yeah.
And I then showed a lot of how that could be applied to the Daleks. Some of it's really straightforward. Like, you could look at the jungle from Planet of the Daleks if you wanted the sort of EV version, or you could really go for it, and you can go for, what did they do in the movie? How did that look? What do those colours look like? I personally wanted to go for a really bold palette here, because it's such a sort of heightened experience. It's a completely nuts story. If you sit down and actually look at what's going on, the whole thing is mad. This doctor's sort of kidnapped 2 school teachers, taken them to a distant planet that they do not want to be on, and they want to leave immediately, and has tricked them into getting captured by these aliens. So the whole thing is completely nuts, and I really wanted to sort of reflect the 60s. I didn't live through the 60s, so this is my sort of interpretation of the 60s, with all the bright colours, all the lava lamps, all the Sergeant Pepper sort of paraphernalia that comes to mind when I think of the 60s, and put that into the colour palette. So it wasn't a dictatorship, of course. We just did discuss it as teams. We sent stuff over to Bad Wolf and we said, look, we've got palette A, B, C, D, what do you think? Sometimes they went, palette A is perfect, go with that. Sometimes they said, oh, I like this element from B and this element from D. Could we have another mock-up that combines the two, etc.? So that was really, really fun.
There was a lot of discussion about the console, wasn't there? I seem to remember about there was green or whether it should be white. And now it seems like, of course, we were right, I think, to make it white. It doesn't have to be green narratively. And it's Doctor Who's original gag, isn't it? That it's a battered blue police box on the outside, and inside it's a gleaming white spaceship. But all those sorts of discussions, and what colour do we make Barbara's blouse, and all that. But I've said this elsewhere. But I now genuinely, when I see clips of the black and white Daleks episodes, it now feels like as of a work in progress print. It's like the colour version now is it may as well have always been in sort of glorious colour, because the work that sort of Rich and Tim and Scott have done is just sort of mind-blowing. That is the version that lives on in my imagination now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to say I agree with that. And there's just so many elements of it where you can look, for example, at the original colour photography that was taken. I think it was Raymond who's that took some photos and colour. But
it was very basic photos from part 7.
Yeah, which is they're a fascinating insight. But the brief was to make the Daleks in colour, not a documentary about the Daleks in colour. So it didn't necessarily have to go for the absolutely authentic colours, but you could also...
It's like souls, aren't they, out of those actual on-set colours? It's like there's metallic and blue. It's
everything's pale blue. Everything's pale blue. So yeah, but the TARDIS console room is actually a perfect example of where we took the blue floor, because that's what it was on set, but we decided to go for the white console because that was what they were hoping to achieve. So it's sort of a perfect sort of encapsulation of where we could lean in on the original colours, but have some artistic interpretation of them as well.
And ultimately, it came down to what do we think looks best. It's that at the end of the day. But I remember listening to one of Toby Haydock's podcasts where he happened to talk about the colour of the flower that Stu at the beginning. He found out somehow what colour it was, so I immediately messaged Rich and went, "This is the colour we."
It's incredible, isn't it?
So there's that level of attention.
What colour was it that he found out?
I think he made it. I think the sort of the orangey.
I think it wasn't orange, but I'll have to read. No, it's Kieran. That was Kieran. Yeah, he did all the jobs absolutely brilliantly.
It's about finding out where we can what the original colours were bearing it in mind, but ignoring it if we think it would look better in a different colour. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Really is, and that's twice as true when you're talking about characters as well, because you've got to think about how they're going to look in every single set.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes, so historically, if you're adhering to the colours that they stuck with at the time, you have 3 female characters in this story, all of whom are wearing blue. You've got Barbara in blue, you've got Susan in blue, you've got Dione the Thal, which they made Terry Nation write in, because I think he'd written he wrote entire. They were all men, the Thals, and I think he was made to go back and do it again. You've got to include at least one woman, Terry. Come on, they're all dressed in blue, and again, you want just a bit of variety there, especially when you're throwing Barbara into the caves or those sort of bluey corridors. You don't really want her wearing a blue top as well.
Sure.
Need a bit of contrast.
Did you ever think about the sort of wider colours of the Cushing movies for the Daleks themselves, or is it kind of just so clear that Dead Planet Daleks are blue or silver with blue spheres?
I considered it briefly. Like I think Ben and I sort of half joked in a let's sort of feel this out a bit way. What if one of them was red, and that was in charge? And then it soon became ridiculously complicated in how we'd actually achieve that and how that would work in the story and all of that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But it wasn't, I don't think, a serious conversation. I think we were always going to make the Daleks silver and blue because...
Red one in the end. There's a red one in the montage at the end.
Yeah, I did do that. I put Barbara in a blue top montage.
There you go.
There you go. There was a few moments, particularly the montage, where you could be a bit of fun. But I thought these original Daleks are so iconic.
Yeah.
You don't need to change them. They're works of art as they are. Yeah, I don't think I would have been comfortable making the hemispheres red or something like that. They're silver and blue and they look gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yeah, the other thing I was thinking about is this. It must be really difficult because there's so much, particularly in those early episodes, of high contrast. You get the bright light that the Doctor goes into in the Dalek control room. There's quite a lot of contrast also in the room they're in just before that they meet the Daleks for the first time. You can sort of see a lot of that going on, and I guess trying to work out what colours things should be with that amount of contrast must be quite tricky.
I feel like I've been talking too much there, Tim. Do you want to challenge?
Well, I didn't work on any of the scenes you've just been talking about.
Well, I can start, then you can jump in if you like. The radiation room scene is one that is really difficult to colorise. It's really, really dark with massively bright spotlights, and you've got actors moving in and out of them. And there's no way you can get out of that because it's a huge plot point. That is where they discover they've got radiation sickness, and then they walk through the door to discover the Daleks. You can't do much. Certainly can't remove it. So that was a very difficult scene to colorise. I did the interrogation of the Doctor in the bright pink light, and latterly when he's actually caught in the Dalek base. And there are times where you're working on that is a little bit frustrating because of the quality of the footage in mid shots or long shots, particularly at that towards the end of the story. The quality of the footage isn't quite there, and so I put the pink light on and you're losing a bit of detail in Hartnell's face, but then when you jump back to the close-up for senseless evil killing and all of that sort of stuff, they're close enough to be able to get that finer detail back in, so you can be a little bit more gentle on how you colorise it. You can add those details back in. So yes, when there is high contrast, Tim may disagree, but personally I find that a lot harder to work with. I like gradients that gradually move. I think that's how things are done nicely when you add a little bit of colour to the cheekbones, etc. When you can't see the cheekbones, it's an issue.
It's much easier to colorise it when you can see it, basically. If you can't really see what you're doing, you're kind of guessing, and it's a challenge. I was quite lucky that most of the stuff that I did was fairly evenly lit, so I didn't have to deal with crazy contrast too much.
Or Scott had to. He did the radiation scene, and he had to do the caves with the roving.
All of the dark scenes, didn't he?
He did. Yeah, that was intentional. When I was divvying up who could do what, I thought that would play to Scott's strengths.
Yeah, well, it does. Yeah, but yes, I did all the TARDIS scenes, all of the stuff in the cell, which was most of what I did. What else did I do? Barbara wandering around the corridors. And
Yeah, a bit of corridor stuff.
The corridor stuff. Oh, well, the escaping, the heist sequence, is what people are calling it online, where they're escaping up the lift shaft.
That's my favourite bit. It's just brilliant. I remember when I watched Ben's first edit and that came up, I just thought, oh, this is just joyous. I mean, how many times have I watched it? It was like watching it again for the first time. It was just so much fun.
I found the really bright reds. Bright reds are really hard to do, and there are so many bright reds in that sequence. So yeah,
yeah, I stitched you up a little bit there, didn't I? Because I did. Now, actually, Ben, you can tell me if this is true, but when you first sent your edit over to Bad Wolf, you took my Daleks YouTube video with them blasting through the door.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you'd colorized that final bit of as they're escaping up the lift shaft and the Daleks blast down the door. And so in the very first pass that I sent to Bad Wolf, just to sort of show off, what is possible and how thrilling it is to suddenly see something go from black and white into color. The version that I sent to Phil and Russell had that in the middle, that just 60 seconds where it goes into color, and they weren't expecting it. And so the impact that had on them was something that we all wanted to sort of keep in mind and try to retain as the project went on. That sudden thrill of seeing something go from black and white into color, seeing, even not just necessarily the transformation itself, but seeing things in color. It informed the edit sometimes. We're like, well, we could have, we could keep in this scene of the Thals chatting with the Doctor and Ian and Barbara and Susan, but really, we want to see this monster, or we want to see this set. We want a bit of them walking through the marshes. We want to see the thrill of finally seeing that in color. Of course, we need to see that creature rise out of the swamp, even though it's cuttable. He is cuttable, and he's only there for a couple of shots. And then you can see the pump under him, but you still you want to get him in there. So yeah, it's about trying to tap these brilliant thing is in color for the first time.
You can't cut that creature. That's brilliant creature. You can't cut that.
You can't cut that bit. You can't. There are still people crossing food machine.
But yeah, of course, that left him with the unenviable job of having to match my colours that I'd done sort of 2 years previously or something.
Yeah.
Because it went from my shot to his shot to my shot to his shot. So yeah, that's
a sequence where the most people actually worked on the one single sequence, because we divided up by what the set was, but we had pretty much everyone working on that particular sequence, I think. But yeah, certainly I was matching colours that you had done in a YouTube video however many years previous, which was, I've never had to do anything like that before, so I've never had to match other people's colorization. So that was a bit of a challenge to do, but I think it all works.
I think you rose to the challenge, Ted.
I think it all knits together.
I also think we need to give a lot of credit to...
that much.
I think we need to give a lot of credit to Kieran Hyman as well, because he was doing our grade for us as we went to make sure that my work, Scott's work, Tim's work and his work all sort of felt uniform. And that's unbelievably difficult to do. Like there was tricks that we pulled to try and keep it, we all working off the same colours and palettes, obviously. And I think there's that wonderful scene where Susan enters the TARDIS and the doors are open and you see the jungle outside. So the TARDIS is Tim's set, the jungle is Kieran's set. So Tim did his bit and then Kieran just did the jungle on top, So when she leaves the TARDIS, it's completely consistent to the outside.
No, I sent Kieran frames like, could you do the jungle bit so that it matches? And he did, and I just kept it as it was and added the blue lightning, of course. But yeah, it was. I don't think there were many shots like that. It's rare to see one set in the background of another set, but the TARDIS is.
We do see the TARDIS set, don't we? In one of the long pans.
Oh, in episode 7, you mean? Yes, I spotted
one of the mistakes we let.
I've never seen that before until the colorized version.
Yes, you can see a bit of TARDIS in the background in the Dalek control room in episode 7, but
it's so kitsch and perfect. Why would you?
Those kitsch moments. We thought, wow, yeah. Got it. I mean, the other thing that we were going to at one point, Russell initially suggested that we should sort of standardize what the Daleks call their cameras. Are they ranger scopes, laser scopes? Terry Nation just keeps changing his mind in between episodes, and then he came to sort of rewrite those lines for the bit of ADR for some extra lines for Nick Briggs and for David Graham to record, and didn't quite have the heart to standardise it. There was something quite nice about the messiness of Terry Nation's original, where they just have about 100 different names for those things.
Laserscopes and fibroscopes and the files have legiscopes and a lot of scopes.
All sorts.
Yeah. I love that you were bold enough to leave in some of those cardboard Daleks as well, actually. I hadn't kind of noticed that first time through, but yeah, I mean, again, it's all sort of part of the original, isn't it?
Was there an intention to replace those? I didn't do those scenes, so I don't really know.
I think with the cardboard Daleks, it's whether you could have replaced them convincingly. You can sort of paint out the bottoms of them, but they're still very, very static. And so you may as well embrace the cardboard bases as well. There are other bits where, as you'll have seen, some of the joins between the background flat and the studio floor we've painted out, and all sorts of other little bits and pieces going on. Lots of correction to the Dalek lights, so they now do flash in time with the dialogue. But there's a limit to how much of that you want to do.
My favourite fix that we applied in the whole thing by a mile is an extermination right at the end. They applied the effect wrong. So the Thal gets shot and then he lands on the floor and then the inversion happens. And Kieran went in and he fixed it so that the Thal is inverted as he's being shot, and then as he lands on the floor, it goes back to how it should be. So yeah, there's lots of little things like that. If you were to ever watch it with the original and compare it, you can see where, we've gone in and sort of we try to be quite thoughtful when we do those things, but we've done those things nonetheless.
Yeah. You mentioned, Timothy, the Barbara gets sort of trapped scene right at the very start of the thing. I mean, what I loved about that was there was definitely enough of that to have that kind of creeping menace feel to it. But also I liked the way that the soundtrack was kind of sympathetic to the original. There's the additional Mark Ayres music in there that's sort of adding to it, but it didn't, it felt very much, in sympathy with the Tristram Carey stuff.
Yeah, I think that's what Mark was sort of aiming for throughout. I mean, again, the note from Russell and Phil to Mark, it was the same note he gave to me doing the edit. It was the same note that he gave to these guys doing the colorization, which is be bold with it. We want to be respectful, and we're all huge fans of 60s Doctor Who, but you can't be so respectful that you end up doing nothing with it, and you have to treat it like a piece of 2020s television, because we're all here on this podcast, we're massive Doctor Who nerds, but it's the other hundreds of thousands of people who are watching it on the telly that we've also got to bear in mind. So you've got to make decisions when it comes to the editing and the colour and the sound design and the music that will work for today's 12-year-old, today's 16-year-old, today's 36-year-old as well. It's the not we's as well, which we're very much hoping that this has been or will prove to be a gateway drug to all the rest of 60s Doctor Who. But we've got to reel people in the first place. And that's what Mark, I think, was... I don't want to speak for Mark, but that's what Mark was aiming for with his music, I think.
Yeah. I love also the opening titles, the sort of slightly psychedelic feel that you get with that additional bit of colour in them. And again, the slight augmentation of the sound, but very sympathetic to the Delia Derbyshire original. Yeah, very nice.
The opening was the biggest nightmare ever, because, as you know, after the titles, it goes into that weird... What's that effect? Solarized?
Is it solarized? I think it's solarized.
Yeah.
Sort of crucial 20 seconds. They're stepping out of the TARDIS. You cannot edit around it. And we tried. It's solarized black and white. I know, I know what they were aiming for, but they never, ever did that in Doctor Who again. And there's a reason why. So in the end, it was sort of... I think it was Russell who went, look, we're trying to be so clever to find ways of editing around this, and there are things we can do with the colour or CG, or let's just kind of embrace it and leave it in. So we have the titles opening in colour, because you've got to, because that's what people expect.
Yeah.
Daleks in colour. But then we fade to black and white, and we play out the opening, other than the captions that appear on screen, we play out the opening sort of 20, 30 seconds in black and white, in weird solarized black and white at that, before it then sort of Wizard of Oz style explodes. Beautiful.
Yeah. I had written down here Wizard of Oz. It does. I guess you have that kind of sense of it, even if it's inadvertent.
I mean, there's a version of this when we were talking about how we can cut it down, how we can afford to do this, how we don't, kill Rich and Tim and Scott, and how we allow them to have social lives and time with their families over the course of the year. There was an initial discussion about, could we play out the the first sort of 5-10 minutes in black and white, and maybe it only explodes into colour when they enter the Dalek city. But then, again, you're billing this as the Daleks in colour. You need to be colour pretty much from the off. You can't make people wait another 10 minutes before they get to see. I mean, again, we had to keep reminding ourselves that this isn't just for Doctor Who fans. This is for the more casual viewer and future Doctor Who fans. So, yeah, colour from the off.
It's it's got a whoop from the in-laws. When the in-laws watch it, and it sort of blossomed into colour. There was a ripple of applause. They were all very happy.
A lot of not we's. Like maybe people are assuming that all black and white Doctor Who was shot like that, like the solarized 20 seconds. Maybe they've done the most incredible restoration work, and I'm happy to let them think.
Yeah. I mean, I guess how fantastic for you that it became the main event on the anniversary day. It's the one piece of new Doctor Who that was being shown on that day, wasn't it? Which was, I think, great.
I was really surprised that we're going to get the 23rd. Really, I was amazed when I first heard. I don't know what it was.
As these guys were sort of nearing the end, they're a few months away from
but nowhere near the end.
There's never an end. But two nice things happened at once. One was that we heard that it would be on TV and on the 23rd, which is partly a quirk of the calendar as well.
Yeah.
Star Beast went out on, it had to be Saturday night, and the nearest Saturday was the 25th. So we were lucky there. If it had been 10 years ago, then we'd have probably, been on the 21st or something like that. And the other thing is that we heard that we were going to get to do another one for next year, which we're sort of currently starting work on. And that was sort of the loveliest sort of show of support from the BBC. The people who make those decisions are, well, everyone's a Doctor Who fan, but they're not Doctor Who fans like us. This is someone who the people who made those decisions saw the work that Rich and Kieran and Scott and Tim had been doing, and went, yeah, we'll have another one of these for next year. So that was a lovely sort of show of confidence from the BBC. So we're very lucky.
And what about reaction? How has it been for the last week? What's your experience been of the reaction to it?
Thursday night, it goes I've never quite had anything where I've done things for sort of online before, where I did some stuff for Channel 4 back in the day where episodes would go up each week, but it would be on the streaming platform, so people would sort of watch at some point that evening, or maybe catch up the next day or in the next week. But this was the first time I've experienced, something I've made going out on the telly for hundreds of thousands of people to watch and see. Sort of, I was watching it go out on the television while I had sort of Twitter open, and there's a lot of noise, but the reaction seems to have been mostly really good. We knew going in that I was asked, when I was first brought on board, which was about 2 years ago, I was asked to sort of prepare a document just talking about how we could do it and throwing around all sorts of ideas. And one of the things I said right at the top of that was that what we are doing is sacrilegious. And we know it. And we knew 2 years ago that a lot of people would love this, some people wouldn't, and Ian Levine really wouldn't. And we knew that going in. And the reaction has sort of blown us away. What's been absolutely lovely is how many kids seem to have watched and stuck with it for the 75 minutes. That's sort of, validating, vindicating Russell's vision, which was when he came back as showrunner, not just to sort of bring David and Catherine back and cut a new Doctor and a whole new era. It was to revitalise the archive. And you've seen the first part of that with everything going up on iPlayer and things like Tales of the TARDIS. But this sort of colorisation project was a big part of that too. And to hear that so many people, sort of 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 16-year-olds have been watching has just been glorious. The Twitter reaction seems to have been mostly really positive. Instagram reaction seems to be. Audience reaction, lovely. Within 20 minutes of the end credits rolling, The Telegraph had already posted a 5-star review, which is amazing. I should point out that Star Beast 2 days later only got 4 stars from The Telegraph. So there we go. You go on to, Gallifrey-based Doctor Who forum, and of course the opinion is slightly more mixed. Yeah. What was lovely, though, I will say, and this is God's honest truth, is I did briefly check out
Yes,
I think the first, I picked a page at random to see what people were saying. The first post was really nice. The second one was really angry about it. The next one was sort of really nice, and there were a couple more angry ones, a couple more nice ones. But each one, and I think it was maybe just luck of the draw, the page I picked at random. But the first angry post I saw said that they didn't like it, they didn't approve, especially of the cut down edit. But they were sat there with their girlfriend who'd never seen any 60s Doctor Who before, and she really loved it. But hey, and then the next angry post said that they didn't like it, but they had been watching with their 2 and 7-year-old who were transfixed. So, quoting that verbatim, I promise. And the next one who said they didn't like it, they didn't like it, but their sister, who'd never seen Doctor Who before, called them to say that she absolutely loved it. And so I was starting to notice a bit of a pattern there, and then I logged out of Gallifrey Base and haven't been back. But I think if we can sort of get people, 6-year-olds, and if we can get them watching, we've done a good job. And also 5 stars from the Telegraph, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? And it's the most subjective thing ever. I was reading some of the posts, the massive swing in opinion was just absolutely amazing to see. Some people said, I was watching it with my wife or something, and she didn't even realise it had been colourised. And then, which was particularly nice.
Like
and that was followed by this is the worst colorization job I have ever seen in my life. So I think possibly the truth lands somewhere in the middle, and I won't get too offended by that. But it's just, it's one of those things. Some people were delighted at certain colour decisions. Some people hated those colour decisions, but it caused loads of debate. And I think the people who are going to debate those sorts of things, that's wonderful and that's valid and that's great. But that's not really who this was made for. It was definitely made for the not we as a sort of, hey, look, check this out. Doctor Who's got this rich and amazing tapestry that you can log into and enjoy. And I think the reaction has been, maybe I follow the right people on Twitter, but the reaction I've seen has been really positive. And it's been thrilling. It's been absolutely amazing.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because people, most of the, you can sit here and say, well, most of the people who've messaged us loved it. Yeah, well, they would. People are nice. Mostly people are nice. You're only going to get the odd person who messages you to say they've just watched what you've made and they hate it. That's happened a couple of times, but it's rare. You need to hang out in the corners of the internet and on those Twitter threads where people don't know you're reading. And it's been really heartening to see that the vast majority do seem to have embraced it and seem to have enjoyed it very much. So that's been nice.
Mm.
Yes. That's been your experience too, Tim?
Generally, yes. I mean, all I've seen are what other people have posted about it online, because all of my friends and family are in Australia and they haven't seen it yet. So I have no sort of first-hand reactions, but everything I've seen online, well, most of what I've seen online has been really very positive. Like you say, people saying their children or wives or girlfriends or non-fans really, really enjoying it. And that is who it's for. And so we've sort of succeeded in what we set out to do, which is always very gratifying to know that we've succeeded and that people like it.
And also, you've got at the it's a big team which extends beyond us, and at the top of that team is Russell and Phil. And so, although it's been delightful that people have embraced it, we shouldn't be surprised really, because it's like they do know, Russell and Phil do know what they do know how to make TV that people will watch and enjoy. They've some experience and quite a few BAFTAs and things between them to demonstrate that fact. So they were right, I think, in their instincts. And I just love Russell's sort of dedication to, sure, I'll come back and make Doctor Who again, but we are not going to neglect the 60 years of amazing Doctor Who that's been made before. And the new episodes don't. The new episodes are as well. You've seen this. Last week's was an adaptation of a 1980 DWM comic strip, but I know that he's wanting to revitalize those 60s and 70s and 80s stories alongside sort of making a huge success of David's and Ncuti's eras as well. I love that.
Yeah. And you've become part of canon now. I mean, you're part of the Whoniverse, so that must be pretty exciting as well.
Which version is canon?
Both.
We've messed around with it enough that which version is canon? That'll be a debate for the ages.
I get to share credit with William Hartnell. That's all I'm worried about. That's brilliant. Didn't think that would happen.
It hadn't occurred to me. That is actually fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I know I looked. I looked online because I wanted to watch it again on the iPlayer, and you go on there, and it's the Daleks in colour. The Daleks, they're side by side. They're both canon. You choose.
It's lovely, isn't it? And I got the honour of, because we recorded new lines with David Graham. So myself and Mark Ayres went to David Graham's house, and he recorded some new lines of Dalek dialogue for us. And so not only do I share a credit on screen with William Hartnell, but I got to play William Hartnell. I got to play the Doctor opposite David Graham delivering his Dalek lines, because someone needed to read in the Doctor's lines. I think that's what I said. Someone needs to read in the Doctor's lines. They'll very much do this. Mark has a microphone in his hand. I think this be me. So that was the greatest day of my year. Made a little very happy.
And he was also Charlie the Barman, wasn't he, in the Gunfighter? So he acted opposite Hartnell as well as doing the Dalek voices. Yeah,
he's done. And also, we often talk about Doctor. The history of Doctor Who is the history of television, and there's a lot of truth in that. The history of David Graham is the history of television as well. So to have him, the sprightly 98 come back and do some new lines of Dalek dialogue written by Russell, it's the sort of thing that only this show could do. Bestriding the eras in quite that way was magical.
I was saying to you, Ben, when we met, that David Graham is, Grandpa Pig to my daughter, and Parker to my dad.
Oh, right. Yes.
And to me, the original voice of Daleks, just what an incredible career.
Yeah.
And to get him to return to that role for this was absolutely surreal. Brilliant. The whole thing's been brilliant. I can't believe it. It's been such a privilege.
Well, look, thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences in making this. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I'm sure the listeners will have got a lot out of that, just understanding a bit more about some of the creative choices that you made and how you went about it. So thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Cool. All right, love to chat with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers.